This is our Sichos class. This year, we're going to be learning Sichos that interpret the story of the Chumash about the Shvatim, about the 12 tribes, what we call affectionately Yosef and his brothers. That's what we call this part of the Chumash, right? The first half of Bereshis is Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Vayeshev, Miketz, V'yigish, Vayechi is Yosef and his brothers. And as I've explained to you a number of times already, we're not learning this to interpret little aspects. We're learning this to see if we can find a pattern that interprets the stories of the Chumash in a way that enlightens it. Right? So, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov have one very significant characteristic. They represent all of us. Avraham is everybody's father, Sarah is everybody's mother, Yitzchak is everybody's father, Rivka is everybody's mother, and so on. Even Rachel and Leah are considered everybody's mother. There's a very interesting proof which Rashi brings. You know the story of Rus? Yeah? At the end of the story of Rus, a baby is born to Rus. Remember? The end of the book of Rus, and Naomi is so happy, of course. And she gives this child blessings. And amongst the blessings that she mentions that he should be like the children of Rachel and Leah. Now what's the problem? Boaz is Yehuda. Yehuda is from Leah. And she puts Rachel ahead of Leah. So Rashi brings in the Chumash, this was a concession. That even Leah's children admitted that Rachel comes before Leah. But it reveals something more meaningful, and that is the idea that we're all the children of Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, spiritually speaking, even if we're not their children biologically, just like we're all the children of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But that's where this ends. The moment you get to the tribes, two big things happen. Number one, it's split. There's 12 paths. That's why it's the competition. That's why in the classes I gave you last week and 2 weeks ago, we discussed the Oviv Shomar Asadover. One of the wonderful, really creative ideas that the Rebbe suggested of Oviv Shomar Asadover is Yaakov wants to keep it together. Yaakov is one man. From him comes 12 paths. He sees the diversification. He sees the divisions. It's supposed to happen. But his eye view, his bird's eye view, allows him to see how all these 12 are not distinct paths. They're aspects of a collective. They're contributing to something whole. Yaakov wants to preserve that as the nation of Israel develops and diversifies and splits more and more and more, Yaakov will be the Shmira, will be the guardian of keeping it all together. So this is the transition which happens in the latter part of Bereshis versus the former part of Bereshis, is all of the ideas that are significant enough in the life of Avraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov and Rachel and Leah, for the Torah to relate, because they're not just histories and historical fact, but they're insights and lessons that are eternal. For example, Avraham is defined by giving. Yitzchak is defined by digging wells, which means to say by getting people to not take, but to find goodness inside of themselves. And Yaakov is defined, I'm sorry for being so blunt, by tzaddis. It's 3 steps: goodness, exactness, and challenge. All of these 3 insights are the property of every Jew. After you have an Avraham, a Yitzchak, and a Yaakov, now you have 12 Shvatim, who are going to ultimately go down into Mitzrayim, become a great nation, million strong, only to be reinvented and reborn and recreated when they leave Egypt and get the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch. But at that point, we will have gone from complete unity to maximum division. Avraham is 1, Yitzchak is 1, Yaakov is 1. Each one of them is the entire Jewish nation. At Har Sinai, there's 600,000 men which represent the maximum diversity that could be amongst the Jewish people. The beginning of that diversification is the 12 brothers, the 12 children of Yaakov Avinu, like I said earlier, which are affectionately called Yosef and his brothers. So the first characteristic of these parshiyos is this division. and the competition and the jealousy that comes with it, and so on and so on. The second is Galus. The life of Yosef and his brothers is defined by Egypt. Yosef went into Egypt when he was 17. He wouldn't see his father again until he was 39. There's a 22-year span between when he left, disappeared, and when he rediscovered. So if he was 17 or 18 when he left to Mitzrayim, how old was Reuven? Couldn't have been more than 7 years older, 8 years older, so he was 24, something like that. Binyamin was a couple of years younger, and all the remaining brothers were in the intermediate years. Okay? So they were born in Haran, in Lavan's house. They come back to the Holy Land, to Eretz Canaan, and relatively speaking, within several decades, not right away, but within several decades, they will depart from the Holy Land and move on to Mitzrayim. We assume that the brothers all lived over 100 years. There's actually Shvatim that tell us not just how long they lived, but their actual Yardzeiten. There's Midrash Chazal. We know the Yardzeiten of the 12 Shvatim. The last of them to die was Levi. He lived 136 years, and he came into Egypt. He was, I figure, around 43, which meant he spent over 90 years in Mitzrayim. So their lives are defined not by their early years, because their early years, they're in their father's shadow. When they're born, they're their father's children. When they become independent men, or they become people identified as themselves, they're in Mitzrayim. Initially, Yaakov is with them. Yaakov lasts 17 years in Mitzrayim. Yaakov Avinu passes away. This is their contribution. This is their place in the history of the Jewish people, going into Mitzrayim, going into Galus. And of course, going into Galus has several effects. Number one, the nation is born. They become many, many, many people. And number two, they have to be completely destroyed and reconstructed as a new people. Which happens ultimately when they leave Mitzrayim and they get to Teref Malkadosh Baruch. So we're going to be learning Sichos. Following this narrative, this idea, we're done with the one. We're even done with the Avav Shalma As David, how the one is trying to keep the many together. We're now going to be discussing the Shvatim, the Shiftei Kah, who each serve Hashem in a different path, and Galus. Those two themes are going to come together repeatedly. The next 4 parshas, the next handful of classes, let's say 10, I don't know how long it's going to take, is the story of the brothers of many different types of Jews in exile. And just to add a little detail, one of the things which sets these parshas aside is dreams. The beginning of Vayeshev is dreams, Yosef's dreams. The end of Vayeshev is dreams. The butler and the wine and the baker have dreams. The beginning of Miketz is dreams. The Pharaoh has the dream about the 7 lean years and the 7 abundant years, and so on. It's not coincidental that part of the Torah, which is discussing the transition into Galus, is associated with dreams, because Galus is often compared to a dream. The relationship or the relatedness between Galus and dreams is when a person is asleep, they're sort of numb. Galus is a kind of a numbness. Galus is a kind of a condition where you're experiencing pain, but it's not too acute. You're experiencing spirituality, but it's not too sharp. Everything is dulled. That's what a dreamlike state is, and it's therefore completely logical that part of the Torah, which is discussing Galus, is crowned, is represented by dreams. Okay? Anybody want to make any comments or ask any questions?
What was that first? Sorry, I missed it when you said the first thing was something and the second thing was Galus.
The first is diversification.
Okay.
We're not dealing with one person that represents all of the Jewish people. We're dealing with 12 people. Each one represents 1/12 of the collective. There's different paths to God. Each of the Shvatim is a different path. I mentioned to you in the Siddur class that it says in Kisar Arizal that there's 12 different nusachs atfilu, which correspond to the 12 different Shvatim, and we have only 4 of those. Remember I mentioned that. In Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, there's no 12 paths. There's only one, because they're one person representing all the different paths.
So these two concepts are about the Shvatim.
These two concepts are what we're going to be doing for the foreseeable future. So let's read. And as always, we're going to read the underline. I have to tell you something. This is tricky, because I'm really playing games here. I'm really playing games. In this Sicha, the Rebbe wants to juxtapose Yud Tes Kislev and Pashas Vayeshev. He's trying to juxtapose Yud Kislev, which is a Hasidic holiday, and the story of Yosef going into Egypt. Well, what I have done is I have very, depending if I want to be honest, dishonest, either skillfully or selfishly, completely made disappear the Yud Kislev from the Sikha. We're only going to be learning the Yosef parts. It's like the Kislev Sikha is not here, and I want you to know you can do it. You can do the opposite also. You can Yud Kislev the Sikha and skip Yosef. Because I'm not talking Yud Kislev, we're talking Yosef. When we're done, you'll realize that one of the brilliant ideas in the Rebbe Sichos is that you can learn the same Sikha 3 different times and take 3 different ideas out of it depending on your emphasis. We are discussing Yosef, his brothers, and the Galus. How this all relates to Alter Rebbe is it's the same Sikha, but it's for another occasion. So here we go. Der Parshe Retzich. You know the girls, the policy. I read the underlined only. This parsha discusses Veged Chilas Sibas Yeridas Yisrael L'Mitzrayim. The first causes which affected that the Jewish people should fall into Egypt. On Lebendik for them, it all starts with was Yaakov Avinu geschickt Yosef in Me'emech Heaven. Yaakov Avinu sent Yosef in a place called Emech Heaven. Now simply Emech Heaven means the valley of heaven. But the Rashi says Me'emech Heaven means that Yaakov sent Yosef to Mitzrayim, and the Eibishter was saying that Emech Heaven, many, many years earlier in Heaven, I had made a covenant with Avraham Avinu for his descendants to be not mine. And one of the aspects of that covenant was that in order to become mine, they must go through an exile. So Yaakov Avinu thinks he's sending Yosef HaTzadik to his children to find out how they do it. In fact, it's Me'emech Heaven. This is all going to set up the sale of Yosef HaTzadik and the disappearance of Yosef HaTzadik, the rediscovery of Yosef HaTzadik, and ultimately the descent of the Jewish people into Egypt. You follow? That's Me'emech. From the secret behind Hebron, und die weiterdicke Gemara is the subsequent events, bis to Yosef's Mechira, until Yosef is sold, when Herodon Messiah is forced to leave and descend into Egypt, was had der Viert, which ultimately led to Hated Lavram, Hated Lavinu Yaakov Messiah. Our father Yaakov Avinu was sent into Egypt. Okay? So that's what's happening now. We're transitioning from Galus to Geula. The story of Yosef is representative of going into Galus. Okay? Now, I'm reading on. Galus Mitzrayim, the exile of the Jewish people in Egypt, top of 91 now, is not given als Einish. It's not a punishment. Not if I kept, to the contrary. Der Tachlis, der Fun is given. The point of the exile in Egypt is and was that the Jewish people should leave Egypt with great wealth. And the Rebbe says, Kipshute begashmis, literally, physically. Und euch beruchnis, as well as great wealth spiritually. Der Golus Mitzrayim hat zugegeben the Yidden, the exile in Egypt prepared the Jewish people as Tavnos Olakim Alahar Azeh, they should serve God Almighty on this mountain. To Kenem Makabal Zayin the Torah, in order to be able to receive the Torah, B'matan Torah, when the Torah will be given. So Yidden are going into Mitzrayim. The reason they're going into Mitzrayim, forgive my bluntness, is to suffer, to be purged. The point and purpose is not that they should remain in suffrage, not that they should remain in Mitzrayim, but rather they should get out of Mitzrayim and get to Torah. The only way to go from point A to point B, from where they were right then until receiving Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was to go through Galus Mitzrayim. Are we clear? So the Rebbe says, let's understand. We're going into Egypt. It's going to be a tough road. And to be sure, it's also a long road. 210 years is a mighty long time, right? Go back 210 years from today. What year is that? That's 1804. What has happened to the Jewish people between 1804 and 2014? An awful lot of stuff. An awful lot of stuff. The Cantonists were introduced after 1804. That they would take Russian boys and put them into 25 years of Russian service in the Russian army. Jewish boys, in the thousands. So much. 200 years is an awful long time. So Egypt is a story of Galus. It's an exhaustive story of Galus. So the Rebbe says, but understand that from the outset, the point of the Galus is you're going to go in to get out. It's not an end. And the justification for the Galus is the emergence at the end. So the argument that Rebbe is trying to present is, since we're going to go into a Galus, which is going to last for such a long time, but we're eventually going to emerge from that Galus, you have to see at the very beginning of the Galus its ultimate end. The idea that eventually you're going to get out of Galus. I think I mentioned this to you in an earlier class. This is a pet peeve of mine. It's one of those ideas that I like very much. I believe I told you the story, the first class I gave you. The Rebbe Rashab passed away in probably March of 1920. 2 weeks, 2 days before he passed away was a Purim Fabrengen. The Bolsheviks, the communists, had just entered to the stuff that winter. They came into the Fabrengen, and the Rebbe Rashab proceeded to absolutely lambaste them, to curse them and to defile them and to defend. And these two agents stood there, turning every color of the rainbow. He was humiliating them and embarrassing them and belittling them. Everyone was certain that tomorrow they're going to arrest the Rebbe. They never came to arrest the Rebbe. The Rebbe passed away literally 16 or 17 days later. One of the ways of understanding that event is this. The Rebbe Rashab was a Rebbe. A Rebbe is in charge of his environment. But he also has a mission. When it comes to his mission, if his mission involves going through tzaddis, that he cannot help. But if it's somebody else's mission, he can see past it. The previous Rebbe had to deal with the communists. This was his Galus. But it wasn't his father's. So the Rebbe Rashab, the father, was before it could see its end. That's the significance of his disregarding them. Not at all. He wasn't afraid of them. The Frierdiker was afraid of them. And all of that cursing and that humiliating was spiritually weakening the power that they would have and ultimately bring to their ultimate demise. Another example of this is Yosef disappears, right? And Yaakov is eating his heart out. Guess what? Yitzchak is very much alive, and he knows Yosef is alive. One of the interpretations of Aviv, Shamar David, that Yitzchak is waiting to see how it's going to unfold. And of course the question is, Yitzchak knows that Yosef is alive. What does he tell Yaakov Avinu? He says the 10 Shvatim made an oath that they would not disclose that Yosef is still alive, right? Correct? But there were only 9 of them. Who was the 10th? God Almighty Himself. So Yitzchak says that the Eibusha chooses that Yaakov should know, I won't disclose it. If Yaakov knows that Yosef is alive, the entire disappearance of Yosef from Yaakov has no meaning. It's only painful because Yaakov is in the dark. But it's only painful to Yaakov. It's not painful to Yitzchak because it's not his Galus. Similarly, Yaakov comes into Egypt, right? He wants to tell Yidden when they're leaving. Remember? He wants to tell them when the Galus is going to end. And the Ruach HaKodesh goes away. Hashem doesn't let him reveal it. Why not? Yaakov knows when the Galus is going to end because this is not his Galus. He can see past it. Remember this? The children are not allowed to know when the Galus ends because they know when the Galus ends, it's not a Galus anymore. They need to endure it, to experience it, to go through it. But that's the experience of the individual participant in his piece of this historic puzzle. But the truth of the story, in other words, what we now know was true before it happened. It was the vision, it was the plan. So the Rebbe here observes, Yosef is going into Egypt. It's going to set up his father and brothers following him into Egypt. It's going to set up, Yaakov is going to pass away, the brothers are going to pass away, Yosef is going to pass away, Galus is going to begin, they're going to suffer for a very long time. And they're going to emerge wealthy, materially and spiritually. Says the Rebbe, all of this exists potentially at the outset. Because it's not like this is the way it happens, this is the way it's planned. This is the design. And somebody who's able to see it from the outside, and of course the example we would use would be Yitzchak for sure, and Yaakov possibly can see past it, can see beyond it. That's the point that I was trying to make here to us in this year. And I'm reading the next paragraph. There in this idea, it's page 91, which is also page 204 if you have regular copies, which you don't have, of course, right? As Galus is nit an iyam fazich, that Galus is not a point unto itself. Nor the ganze kavana umatara from Galus, the entire intent and purpose and end of Galus, is der Eloi was kumt, is the advantage which will ultimately come, durech der Geula funem Galus, the redemption which will come after the Galus. Says the Rebbe is given begila by Yosef. Yosef is the first one to go into Egypt. His descent into Egypt ultimately sets up the entire nation coming down to Egypt. Maybe they tricked us. Usually you go into Galus, we're being taken in chains like the Romans took us. Yosef went into Egypt not with chains, but with the fat of the land. The end was the same. The process was quite different. Says the Rebbe, in Yosef's person, the entire Galus plus the end of the Galus is already represented. Even as the story is understood literally in the biblical passages. Mechiras Yosef, the sale of Yosef, und Yeridas Mitzrayim, his descent into Egypt, is le'enei basar, on the surface, yekumen durch kavanasam habilti retzoyef and Yosef. If you learn the Chumash, you know Yosef was sold into slavery because his brothers were jealous of him. And they were so jealous that they hated him. They hated him so much, they contemplated killing him. And they settled on making him a slave. Wow, what an alternative. So the surface of the story is tragic. It's terrible. Literally incomprehensible. It really is one of those things that you can't make sense of. It is aber der Nachnes Galingaba. But in Yosef's lifetime, it was revealed. Not 200 years on. In Yosef's lifetime, it was revealed. Dem emes v'tachas adavar, the truth and point of it all, as lemichya shlachani elakim b'fneichem v'gomer. You sold me into slavery. You wanted to dispose of me. The Abish that sent me to slavery to be able to feed the whole world. The people shouldn't die from starvation, and I should be able to feed you. You shouldn't die from starvation. So in Yosef's life, the upside, which usually shows itself at the end of the Galus, was already apparent. God Almighty sent me ahead of you for life, to give you a place where you can, so to speak, find refuge on this earth, to give you life for great salvation. And therefore Yosef tells them, and now, you think you sent me here because you didn't like my guts. You should know you didn't send me here. God Almighty brought me here. So the Rebbe's observation is this. Normally, who can see past the Galus? Someone who has nothing to do with the Galus. If you're a part of the Galus, you got to suffer through it. In Yosef's case, even though Yosef arguably is a part of the Galus, but in him you see immediately the Geula effect. Correct? In other words, what I just said, if it's true, is dividing Galus experience into three. Number one, you have nothing to do with the Galus. If you have nothing to do with the Galus, you can see the ultimate remedy for the Galus. Number two, the Galus is all about you, in which case you have no idea how it's going to end and when it's going to end. And number three, even though the Galus is about you, in you personally, the end of the Galus is evident. That third personality is Yosef. The second personality is his brothers and their children. The first personality would be Yaakov and Yitzchak. Okay? So we read on. The Medrash says on the words, V'Yosef hurat Mitzrayim, Yosef was lowered into Egypt. Now girls, in Hebrew the word hurat means to be lowered. Okay? But there's another translation to these letters, Reish Daled, or Yud Reish Daled, which means to dominate, to control. The Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim can be interpreted, Yosef was given dominance over Egypt. Physically, he was taken to Egypt against his will. Spiritually, it was Hurad. He was made the leader over Egypt. Says the Medrash, Kifshein, Yosef is the conqueror. Hainu Mai the Omar, V'yer Miyam Ad Yom. Notice the word V'yer is the same root as the word Hurad. Shalat B'hain. In addition, he also dominated them. He brings another pasuk, Hainu Ad Amrit, Ki Hureidim Cholei V'Arno. There's a really weird medrash that says Hurad Mitzrayim. It doesn't mean Yosef was lowered into Egypt, but he was given conquest and mastery, kifshein and shlita over the Egyptians. Meaning to say that from the moment Yosef went into Egypt, it wasn't a Galus. It was already then for the upside. The kavana, I'm reading only the underline, the kavana matara from the Hirada is the intent and purpose of this descent is as Yosef Zover and Koviv shall become the conqueror and the master. Their Mishnah Lamelach Messiah the vizier in Egypt, Umibil die so that without him La Yarim Ishisa Deves Raglin no one can raise his hand and foot. So the Rebbe is trying to argue, quoting a medrash, that Yosef went into Galus. But it was never Galus for him. Never. It was always how the Galus is going to bring about the Giyur. That's what makes Yosef unique. Okay? Page 92, 205, if it works for you. So now the Rebbe has a question. In Parshas Vayeshev, in this Parsha Vayeshev, Der Meduber Begoloi, in our Parsha, the story that's told is that Yidis Yosef the Messiah Bechol talks about Yosef sent into Egypt. And of course it finishes, Biz, Zayin, Gefinnen, Lechvavei at the end of the Parsha he finds himself in jail, in a pit. Or der Inyan HaTev, V'Hatayelas, the good and benefit, was is gekommen von Herodes Yosef the Messiah, which will ultimately reveal itself by Yosef's descent into Egypt. Wird erst Gala der erzählt li achere ze in die später dicke Parshas Ateiris, first related in the next Parshas. And the Rebbe has a problem with this. Yosef is going into Galus. He's going to be in Galus for 210 years and they're going to depart. But Yosef, different than the Oves who are not in Galus in the first place, and different than the Shvatim who are stuck in Galus, from the moment he enters into Egypt, you see the eventual departure. Right? So the Rebbe's question in Vayeshev you don't see it. In later Parshas you see it. In Vayeshev you see only the bad stuff. The good stuff is only going to begin to Parshas Miketz. And therefore the Rebbe says, Darf men sagen, we must say, as euch beParshaseinu, also in our Parsha, is Feran an Inye v'techen shel Gul, there is an idea and substance of Giyul. In other words, we have to say that Yosef is this unique character, that even though he's a part of the Galus, he sees past it, and in every moment of his life, including the negative moments of his life, that phenomena, that Yosef is anticipating the good, is present. Are we clear? You understand the point? And the Rebbe continues, second column, page 92 or 205, in Geula Upadia from Galus and Efran Drayefan. When a person is in Galus and has to be redeemed, there's three possibilities. You're a prisoner. Of course, being a prisoner doesn't necessarily have to mean figurative. You live in a society which is un-Jewish and you're bound by its laws. It's a form of a prison. It says the Rebbe, in redemption from Galus, there's three possibilities. Number one, b'derech milchama. You fight a war. You have an enemy. Your enemy doesn't like you. You want to get out of your enemy's clutches. You fight and you win. Number two, page 93, please, second paragraph. P'diya b'shalom. You're redeemed from your enemy peacefully. Peacefully means that your enemy discovers that you have a weapon with which you cannot compete and he lets you go automatically. I always give an example. You know what's an example of P'diya b'shalom? The atomic bomb. Or to say it more historically engaged, you know the difference in World War I and World War II? The atomic bomb. What does the atomic bomb have to do with World War I? Answer, it didn't have it yet. Why is that significant? Do you know the answer or not? World War I never ended. It didn't. There was an armistice, there was a ceasefire, there was a negotiated peace. The principle that became so important in World War II, unconditional surrender, did not happen in World War I. Technically it happened, but morally it didn't. When the atomic bombs fell on Japan, Japan cursed the day it started up with the United States. And when America got involved in reconstructing Japan became my best friend. After World War I, Germany and France hated each other more than ever. The war was over, they weren't shooting at each other, but the jealousy and the hatred, the French animus and the German humiliation set up World War II. Those are the historical facts. What does that mean? You have a fight, nobody wins, one loses so much, he says, I don't want to fight anymore. That's not a victory. That's a loss. Nobody won. The Allies didn't win. The Germans lost. And the Germans lost and said to themselves, you know what? Let's rearm, fight again. World War II, somebody won. It was decisive. And ultimately it was the atomic bomb that changed it all, right? And why? Because it was a weapon that not only made us victors, it made the war a non-war. It wasn't a war. God forbid the Japanese decide they want to keep fighting. We didn't have any more bombs between me, you, and the Japanese. We would have created a few more bombs. We would have literally wiped Japan off the face of this earth. Pasha, finished. So, Pada b'Shalom, which is a peaceful idea, means to say, two sides fight, and the war ends peacefully. Ends peacefully means that the second side says to the first side, let's be friends. Not, I don't want to fight anymore. Give me a chance, I'll get some more weapons, I'll learn two techniques and fight again. This is finished. So there's three concepts of redemption. Concept number one is you fight and you win. Or to be more accurate, you fight and someone loses. So the one who didn't lose is the victor by default. Pada b'Shalom means not somebody loses, but someone actually wins, and wins in a way that we call Shalom. Shalom means that the two sides are no longer at war, even in thought.
Can you repeat the Pada b'Shalom?
Pada b'Shalom means two people had a fight.
Yeah.
But when the war is over, the loser is friends with the victor. Seriously. But then there's a third method, top of the second column, page 93 or 206. The hechster oifen is, the third method, the highest method is, der Galus gufa vert nishapech. The Galus is transformed lematav shal geula for the state of redemption. It's not that somebody loses or that somebody wins. The war is transformed itself into a peaceful situation. It's a non-war. That means it doesn't mean that somebody wins and therefore the other guy says, let's be friends. It means instead that the divisions are broken down. Whatever it was that precipitated the war in the first place is completely erased. So three concepts. One is somebody loses. The other one is somebody wins, which is called Pada b'Shalom. And the third one is that something is introduced into the scheme that transforms the war into peace itself. Are we clear? Yeah? Continue to read. Di draye fane hanal in Gula. These three levels of redemption are aligned to the draye fane aveda, the three groups of people. Shvatim, Aves, Yosef. You see? The Shvatim are going to Egypt, they're going to fight. They're not going to win, the Egyptians are going to lose. But it's going to be a bloody fight. The Aves are going to be at peace, they're going to be above the fight. Yosef is higher than both of those. Turn the page. Page 94 or 207, as you prefer. The Shvatim zane gewendere Yitzayim. The shepherds by profession were, the brothers were by profession shepherds. Why were they shepherds? Because they wished to be behizbodedus, in solitude. Hayesam basada, being up in the field, made them moved from Welt, separated from the world. That the matters of which should not disturb them. Become attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Shvatim were on a lower level. To be holy, they have to be isolated. You get involved in the world, it's bad. Okay? B'darget ha'avis, as opposed to the avis. I'm reading inside, third paragraph 94, which is Merkaf Telah, the higher chariot of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is afilu avis, even the avis, gefinden sich in Welt, notwithstanding that they find themselves in the world. Seien sie nicht behislapshach. They never fuse, they never merge, they never become one with the world. Und therefore, seinen die Inyonei ha'elam, the matters of this world are not mivalbul v'kusam b'Hashem, confused or bewildered their connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The office are holy. Holy means that whatever they're doing, they're above the world. They don't have to be farmers, they can be in the middle of the city, but their lives are above the world. And because they're above the world, where they live, it's peaceful. Below them, there may be war. Where they live, it's peaceful. And then the Rebbe concludes, Hecher derfun, the third level is, Dargas Aveda von Yosef, the step of Aveda of Yosef HaTzadik. Was mitad echad, on the one hand, is a given Beslapshut, Benyon Ha'elam, who was revealed in the world. For Zayindik in Mitzrayim has been given a clear gedel of Atzam Yosef, being in Egypt, completely consumed him. Top of the second column now. Umikoshkein, how much more so, when there is Gevorin Melech HaMasan, he became the king over Egypt, like the Pasuk of Apicha Yishak V'Gemer, Achakisei V'Gemer, Shim Below the Yarum Yosef Atzadik became very, very involved with the government of Egypt. More specifically, he became the feeder. He provided food for the whole world during the years of famine. So Yosef is not like the Aves. The Aves are above Galus. The Shvatim have to stay away from Galus because they get caught up in Galus. What's Yosef? He's smack in the middle of the Galus, and it rubs off him like Teflon. He's absolutely invested, totally involved, and it doesn't do anything to him. In other words, Yosef growth is not higher than the Shvatim. Yosef is higher than the Aves. The Shvatim are holy by isolation. The Aves are holy by being above the world. Yosef is as holy as the Aves, but within the parameters of the world. Rabbi Majeski had a grandfather, whom he knew. He was his mother's father. His name was Solneich Belinitsky. He passed away at 99 and a half years old. As they used to say in that culture, he went around on the train. He forgot to get off at a stop, so he went around the second time. His contemporaries passed it away 30, 40, 50 years before him. He passed away in 1984. He was 99 and a half years old. He was a very big chassid and a very senior chassid. And he was a bookkeeper by profession. He was an accountant. So in the bitter, dark days in Russia, the Friedrich once commented about him, sitzt in Buchhalterei und tracht die Chudei Eloah. He's sitting in the accounting office and thinking about the unity of God. That's Yosef. He was very involved in the world. He wasn't spiritually above the world. He was very involved in the world. But the world didn't change who he was. His worldview was realistic. In other words, he was manifest, but his holiness was such that there was no contradiction between holiness and the world. What about Abraham? What about Abraham?
He was interested in idolatry, and he himself...
That was before he became Abraham, but once he became Abraham, he was done. Abraham lived in a desert. Abraham was not a king. They made him into a king, but he lived in a desert. You know why he lived in a desert? Because there was only one road through that desert. And he parked right on the road. So he got all the news and all the people coming and going in the ancient world. Mesopotamia. You learned about the Fertile Crescent, yeah? He was right there on the road. So anybody coming or going from through the entire valley, the river valley of Egypt, up through Syria and down into what is now Iraq and Persia, had to pass by Avraham Avinu's house. He was all the news. He could send messages, he could receive messages, and he could meet people and teach them. But he lived in a desert. Yosef didn't live in a desert, he lived in a palace. Right? So the Rebbe's point is, Yosef is in a way like his brothers, in a way like his fathers. He's like his brothers, he's in Galus. He's like his fathers, that Galus doesn't touch him. His fathers are not touched by Galus because they're brothers. The brothers have to contend with Galus because they're a part of it. The only way they can deal with it is by being shepherds. Yosef fuses those two together. On Afal Pikei, second to the last paragraph, page 94. Nevertheless, haben die alle Tirdes ihm nicht mevalbel gewesen as Advekes B'Hashem. None of his preoccupations, none of his business disturbed him from his avodah. Und euch be'ez asokei behem, as he was involved in Egypt, is given a makava mamish talakus. He remained a seat for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Last paragraph, page 94. Weil, because by im hat mer given that Eid Eliki was the Gami Hechmavel. In plain English, Yosef is higher than Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were holy. How holy? It raised them above. Yosef Atzadik was even holier. How much holier? He didn't have to be above to be above. Was mitzademer, the experience of godliness that Yosef knew, is a feel in the Shaykh's Zogen, you can't even say, as well as Netefes Mokum, that he's above the world. And therefore, can the Rebbe sein, it's therefore possible, that Yosef could be completely involved in the world. Or not, it does not involve dein Vekas, it doesn't disturb his Vekas at all. So Yosef is unique. Okay, in other words, what are we learning in this Sikha? That's part of the narrative of our history. Jews go into Egypt. It's a Galus. There's three reactions. Yaakov is above it. The Shvatim are suffering it. Yosef is and isn't. And therefore, the Rebbe's point is, in Yosef's personality, you have a person who, even though he's a part of the Galus, from the moment it begins, he sees the victory. Next paragraph, okay, page 95, middle of the right column. The Medrash doctor of Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim Kivshein. Yosef goes to Egypt and he's conquering Egypt. Next paragraph. By Imes Gevendi in Eden and Slapshus in Mitzrayim, he personally goes into Egypt and manifests in Egypt. Is Zion Dikdot Biridase, as he was there in that state of descent, is a Geblibim B'Mehusli Halakis, he remained the same godly person he was before. Warum? Because when Yosef kommt on in Mitzrayim, when Joseph arrives into Egypt, is das Gufe macht über Mitzrayim, it transforms Egypt. Bis as euch in der Mokim von Mitzrayim, that in the place of Egypt itself, hat sich gehört Elokus, you can feel godliness, und das hat sich aufgetan gleich, betchilas ha'irah, begins at the very outset, as soon as Yosef arrives, everybody sees he's special. So the Rebbe is teaching us here something very complicated. The essence of the class, in other words, the reason I put this class first in our series of Galus classes is because it makes the big picture point. The big picture point is you're going in to get out, and before you enter, the envisioning of that ultimate departure is already present. In addition, the Sicha is unique, that here is a person who's a part of the Galus, and even though he's a part of the Galus, and him is represented the end of the Galus, because he can be both in it and not in it at the same time.